Oh, we don't have too many.
Thank you. You're going here?
I'll be there, yes.
I'm
gonna grab this one.
Jump up first.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexander Marlow, and I'm editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and Breitbart.com. Thank you for having me today, and I'll be moderating a strong America, protecting opportunity for all. I've been told this is the anchor point of the whole conference. We're going to be talking about so many themes today: what it takes to be a strong America, why strength is important, how we get there, and whether or not it's been deteriorating over the last several years. The thesis: a strong America is dependent on a healthy society, free market capitalism, and a national security apparatus sufficient to protect our interests. We're going to talk about the who, what, when, where, and why of security, and we have an incredible group of people today who will be doing that with me. Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Arthur Brooks, and KT McFarland, and I'll be bringing them each up individually. It's going to start off with each of them is going to have a chance to give a speech to address you for 5 to 10 minutes or so. And then we're going to have the second half of the hour will be dedicated to a panel where we're going to discuss, get them communicating back and forth and answering some of these questions. And perhaps most importantly, why it's even necessary in the year 2015 to have a panel where we are defining American strength and making a case for why it's important. Why is it even necessary? So without further delay, I'd like to bring up Senator Jim DeMint. He rose from a modest South Carolina roots and a career in marketing to build and lead a resurgent conservative caucus in the United States Senate. In 2012, he left the Senate to become president of the Heritage Foundation, the nation's leading conservative think tank. As president, Senator DeMint has been an influential voice in the national debates over health care, immigration, spending, the national debt, and my personal favorite, the dangers of cronyism to American freedom. Senator Jim DeMint, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, folks. Doesn't this feel like a family reunion? I mean, the whole CPAC event, just meeting people from all over the country, and I've seen a lot of you as we've traveled around working with states on different issues like education choice, but it's great to see you here, and I appreciate so many of you who are active in the conservative movement at the state level and helping what we're doing here at the federal level. So thanks for being here. Outside of Washington is fine, but inside of Washington, there seems to be a lot of confusion about who actually won the election last November. There really is. Obama thinks the people who didn't vote won the election, and that's who he's told us he's listening to. But even worse, the Washington establishment, K Street, and all their big government cronies think they won the election last November. They think they vanquished the Tea Partiers and conservatives in the primaries, and basically won the election with the folks who would do what they said they were going to do. But folks, we know the Republicans who took the House and the Senate, who took the majority for the Republican Party, ran against the status quo, ran against the big cronies. And if you listen to what their campaign said, they ran against amnesty. They ran against Obamacare. They ran against things like the internet sales tax. On the other side of this, the K Street guys, they want their payback. They want their amnesty for cheap labor. They want their internet sales tax. They want UN treaties. The list goes on and on. But the bottom line is that the Washington establishment wants to continue the status quo. But the Republicans who won promised to serve as conservatives. And they won because conservatives turned out to vote when the moderates and the liberals stayed home. As a conservative movement, we need to make sure that they continue to hear the voices of freedom-minded Americans all over the country so that they're not co-opted by the chattering class here in Washington. And all of us need to be a part of reminding all the American people, the media, K Street, and the elected politicians, that they were elected because they won as conservatives, and they need to remind everyone that our ideas and our policies build a stronger America, a more prosperous America, and create opportunity for everyone. And we do it, as Alex said in the introduction, in the three key pillars of American strength: a strong society, a strong economy, and a strong defense. These make up the foundation of all of our conservative ideas. They're inseparable. You can't have a strong economy without a strong society that produces people with the character and the capabilities to succeed. And KT will tell us later why you can't really have a strong defense unless you have a strong economy and a government that's limited, out of debt, and focused on the constitutional priorities to protect and defend our country. Folks, who won the election last November? It was conservatives. We won it. We worked the grassroots all over the country. And we need to make sure that the folks inside the Beltway know that we know they campaigned and talked like conservatives. Now we need to make sure that they follow through and really fight for the ideas that they said they believe in. Thank you. The conservative promise to America is opportunity for all, favoritism for none. All the policies we look at, you can really categorize under one of those areas. And we've talked to millennials, we've talked to Hispanics, African Americans, we talked to people all over America. And they're not looking for some special program. They don't want to be part of a minority group. They want to be Americans, and they just want a fair shot at American opportunity. And if we as conservatives can just convince them that our ideas are not only better for the country, but create opportunity for everyone, that's how we get people to vote conservative. But these people deserve a party in Washington that's not handing out political favors, that's not picking winners and losers, making excuses of why they support big crony programs that hand out goodies to the big guys here in Washington. Programs like the Export-Import Bank, that basically all the money goes to big corporations. But they never had a government bank for me when I was in my small business, and all of you out here probably that have businesses have not experienced an Export-Import Bank or some kind of government favors like that. Opportunity for all, favoritism for none. The enemy to opportunity is big crony capitalism. When the government is up here behind closed doors handing out favors to the politically connected. And generally it's the bigs helping the bigs. And that's where we really need your help, to keep the parties accountable to these ideas of let's don't divide the country into a bunch of different groups and play one against another. Let's recognize that Americans want to be Americans, and they want a fair shot at the opportunities that this country can offer. And they really concentrate around these three areas. Let me just say a few things about the culture itself, and then I'm going to leave it to Arthur and KT to talk more about economics and about defense. But everything begins with the character of the people in your country. You cannot have a strong America if we don't have people that have that strong character, those values, and understand what American exceptionalism is. And opportunity for all begins with the opportunity to be born. That's something that needs to continue to drive our consciences here in America, the right to be born. And folks, there's still a lot of disagreement about parts of the life issue around the country, but the large majority of Americans now recognize it makes no sense to be taking the life of children over 5 months into this. And the House has a bill. We need to insist that Republicans bring it back up to make sure that there are no abortions after 5 months of pregnancy. This is the least that we can do at the federal level. And the states are making a lot of progress on that issue, but we need to keep the importance of the individual and the right to life in front of all Americans. A strong society also depends on strong families, and that begins with marriage. Our policies here at the federal level need to encourage marriage rather than what it does now. It discourages marriage. It pays people not to be married. Folks, we need a strong marriage. We know that a child that grows up in a home with a married father and mother in America has almost no chance of living in poverty. That goes across the board. It doesn't matter where you start. If you want an anti-poverty program, let's create programs that encourage and support marriage in America. And we need to make sure that no group of unelected judges here in Washington take away the rights of people in the states to define marriage as a union between a man and a woman. Just one other area of the culture of the society that I'll mention, and it's so important, is education opportunity. If a child does not get the proper education, it's hard to take advantage of all the opportunities in America. The federal government has had its chance the last 40 years or more at trying to direct America's education system. And it just hasn't worked. Whether it's No Child Left Behind or Common Core, we cannot manage the education needs of all of America's children from Washington. But we see what's working. We see states that are expanding charters and all kinds of education choices. And the data is in. What the left told us 10 years ago is not true. Education choice does not hurt the poor or the disadvantaged or the minorities. It is quite the opposite. It helps everyone. It creates opportunity for everyone. And when you have states like Arizona that I think have hit on just the right formula with education savings accounts, parents can put together the education system that works best for their children. And it's working. We don't need to pass another No Child Left Behind here in Washington. We don't need another Common Core. We need to create education and opportunity for all. So folks, thank you for being here. I look forward to being part of the panel. And Alex, we'll put you back on here.
Thank you, Senator. That was a great table setter talking about the three pillars: society, capitalism, economy, and then finally defense. To cover the second pillar, we have the great Dr. Arthur Brooks. He's the president of the American Enterprise Institute, where he's also the Beth and Ravenel Curry Scholar in Free Enterprise. He's the author of numerous books, including the 2012 New York Times bestseller, The Road to Freedom. His next book, The Conservative Heart, will be published in July, and he comically notes he's also a recovering French hornist, which I also find fun and amusing, an old symphony guy back from high school. Dr. Arthur Brooks, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
There's yours. You got it.
Thank you so much. What a delight to be here. Jim DeMint said this is like a family reunion. Yeah, unless you're from my family. I didn't come from a conservative family, but I'm delighted to be with all of you here today. What an honor it is to be with you. How did you get to the conservative movement? Every one of you has an answer to that. You have a personal explanation for what brought you here to CPAC, what brought you into activism, what made you ready to be a warrior for the conservative movement. Think about it. I'm going to tell you how I got to this movement. See, I just told you I come from a background that's not traditionally conservative at all. But I care about the most is what brought me into the conservative movement. And it wasn't economic efficiency. I'm an economist, but that's not it. It's not millions of dollars for rich people. It's not trying to be a tax accountant for the billionaires. No. What brought me into the conservative movement was fairness. And I'm going to tell you why. When I was a little kid, I'm going to take you all the way back to 1970. A lot of you weren't born yet, but some of you were. In 1970, I had an experience for the first time. See, I grew up in a lower middle class neighborhood in Seattle, and I thought I knew poor people. There were people on welfare around, but that's not real poverty, as I found out when I was a little kid. I remember the first time seeing a picture in the National Geographic magazine of a kid in sub-Saharan Africa, a little boy. You remember this picture, a lot of you do, with flies on his face and a distended belly. You remember that? That was the first time that many of us in the United States saw real poverty. And the thought that I had was, that's not fair. See, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just born in a poor country, and there was nothing I could do. Yeah, there was alms for the poor on Sunday morning. There was prayers that I would offer up for that boy, but there was nothing that I could really do, and that was the point. The point of the picture in the magazine was to tell me I couldn't help him. And I guess I forgot about it. I grew up, and so did you. Sometimes you thought about that image and you wondered what happened to him, what happened to those people. But you went to school and you got married and you started your family, and life kind of went on for all of us. Ask yourself now, what happened to that boy? What happened to a lot of those people? I'm going to tell you. Now, to begin with, if you ask Americans what has happened to the poor around the world since 1970, 70% of Americans will tell you it's gotten worse. There's more hunger around the world. That's wrong. That's wrong. Here's what happened between 1970 and 2012. The percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less, that is starvation level poverty, adjusted for inflation. The percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less since 1970 has decreased by 80%. An 80% decrease in the world's worst poverty. Now, I care about fairness, so I'm really impressed. But I got to ask myself, why? And how can we replicate that? See, 2 billion people have been pulled out of starvation level poverty since I was a kid. Now, if you walk around here in Washington, D.C., which I don't recommend, but if you do, and you ask people what pulled all those people out of poverty, it's the United Nations, or U.S. foreign aid, or some World Bank or International Monetary Fund program. Those things are good or bad depending on your point of view, but that's not what did it. You know what pulled 2 billion people out of poverty since I was a kid? 5 things, okay? If you've got a pen and paper, you can write them down. Number 1, globalization. Number 2, free trade. Number 3, property rights. Number 4, rule of law. Number 5, American-style entrepreneurship that started to spread around the world when I was a kid. It was people around the world who, through the means of mass communication, see, we saw them for the first time. They saw you for the first time. You know what they said? I want their freedom and I want their stuff. If you are your brother's keeper, if you love the poor, it's good to give alms, do it more, but you also have to have a system that works while you sleep. That system, those 5 forces together, you know what it's called? Free enterprise. That, my friends, is your gift to the world. You are lifting up the poor in America. You're lifting up the poor around the world for the first time in the history of humanity. Here's the problem. We're walking back from it. The reason that fairness leads you and me into this conservative movement is the same reason we have to be warriors for this system on behalf of those who can't be with us here today because they're still poor. And we have to be outraged by the fact that every government policy that we see these days is militating against this system here and abroad. Are you your brother's keeper? Then fight for free enterprise. Are you your brother's keeper? Don't lose another argument. Don't give an inch. This is our opportunity again and again to lift people up. Fighting for people. So here's my examination of conscience that I do each night and I recommend to you. It's, believe it or not, it's about free enterprise. Because I ask myself this, not did somebody in the press say something mean about me or my organization, the American Enterprise Institute, or you conservatives? Because of course they did. That's okay. I ask myself this, that all of my work go for the benefit of people with less power than me. If the answer is yes, it means I'm working for free enterprise and I'm lifting people up even while I sleep. And that, my friends, is worth fighting for. This is not about the money. It's about the global brotherhood. It's about the morality. Next time somebody tells you the conservatives only care about the rich, say that's wrong. If it weren't for conservative values, the world would stay poor. And if they have their way in Washington, they're going to get poorer again. When you fight, you're not just fighting for some conservative American political ideas. You're fighting for everybody around the world who needs you today and deserves your support. So for being here, for your activism, for your warrior spirit, for free enterprise, God bless you, and thank you.
Okay, we're off to a great start. We've got a strong society now, and everyone understands the value of capitalism, and we've strengthened the economy not just here, but all the way around the world. The last pillar that we need to solidify, national security and a strong defense. And here to talk about that is Fox News analyst KT McFarland. She is their national security analyst and appears regularly on all Fox shows. She's held national security posts in the Nixon, Ford, and Reagan administrations. She received the Defense Department's highest civilian honor for her work in the Reagan administration. Ms. McFarland wrote the groundbreaking Security of Defense Weinberger Principles of War speech, which said America should only go to war to protect our vital national interests and then only to win. I'm also pleased to announce she will be receiving the CPAC Woman of the Year Award tomorrow at the Clear Booth Loose Luncheon. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk about national security, KT McFarland.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. And what he forgot to mention is that I am the proud mother and grandmother and wife of just 30 years. My husband, Alan McFarland, and I've got one of our 5 kids here with us and none of my 5 grandchildren. But what I do have is 2 gentlemen who have just articulated why America is exceptional. Now, Jim DeMint just talked about our exceptional national character. You know, we're the land of opportunity, we're the melting pot. We have redefined what it means to be a great nation. We write our own laws, we conquered a continent, we all came here from someplace else. Arthur talked about the second reason we're an exceptional nation, and that's because of our strong economy, our free market, our ability to reinvent ourselves every generation, to be the strong economic power that the world looks to with envy and admiration. I think of them as really 2 of 3 legs of a 3-legged stool. I'm the 3rd leg. The 3rd leg, a strong defense, doesn't stand unless it has those 2 legs. Because unless we have a strong national character, unless we have a strong economy, my stuff, national security, we're just collateral damage. That's why it's so essential that we have to rebuild and rediscover our national character and also to revive our economy, which we are, I think, on the cusp of doing, largely led by cheap energy. But the 3rd thing that makes us great, the 3rd thing that makes us different from every other country in the history of the world is when we have had a strong defense, we have used it differently. You know, there's something called, Reagan used to call it peace through strength. But because when we have had that moment, when we have had the strong economy, we've had the strong national character, the strong military, we have done something that no other country in history has done. With that much power, instead of going to conquer colonies or to create an empire, we stayed our hand. We think of our national defense and our strong military not because we want to go and conquer countries or seize peoples. We do it because we want to preserve the peace. Reagan said it probably best in modern times. He talked about it as peace through strength. Now, anybody who's been here to listen to these politicians, how many of them have said, I'm for peace through strength, right? Every one of them. Look, it's a catchy phrase. Who's against peace, right? Who's against strength? Peace through strength, though, has a very specific meaning, and Reagan meant it in the following way. He said, ours is not the peace of conquest. Ours is not the peace that comes from surrender. Ours is the peace of being stronger militarily than anybody else to deter anyone from attacking us. He knew that if we had a strong military and the will to use it if we needed, that anybody would look at us would say, you know, we're not going to take advantage of this. We're not going to attack America. We know we're going to get beat. And if they were dumb enough to attack, we had the ability to meet that attack and crush our enemies. There's nothing new about this concept. It was known in Roman times, and it was say to guarantee the peace, prepare for war. It's called deterrence. We have in the past used that power to defend our interests and defend the interests of others. We have been accused, however, by others of using that power to build empires. The Archbishop of Canterbury said to the American Secretary of Defense at the beginning of the Iraq War, he said, you know, you guys say you're great, but you're just using this as an excuse to build an empire, a colony in the Middle East. And the Secretary of State looked at him and he said, Mr. Archbishop, America has sent our sons and daughters abroad to fight. And in exchange for that, the only piece of territory we've ever wanted is a plot in which to bury our dead, who died defending your freedom. And that's what makes us truly exceptional. The problem, though, is that we're in a new era. We enter that era in September 11th, and that's the era where deterrence isn't enough anymore. Deterrence worked in Reagan's time. It kept the peace. It kept the peace, and we were able to defeat communism, and we won the Cold War without firing a shot, and our economy has thrived and succeeded for over a generation of prosperity. But deterrence doesn't work in the age of Islamic radical jihad. Why? Because we're up against an enemy now which looks at us and says, we want to destroy Western civilization. They don't even want to conquer Western civilization, they want to destroy Western civilization. And they look at us and say they believe that they have been given right by their supreme authority to conquer, to kill, to do whatever it takes to establish their caliphate. And they don't think they just have the right to kill. They think they have the responsibility to usher in the caliphate. And that means they're willing to kill Christians and Jews and atheists and religious minorities and other Muslims in order to establish the caliphate that they believe will conquer the world. You don't deter that. We didn't deter September 11th. You don't deter a suicide bomber. You're not going to deter ISIS. You can't deter Al-Qaeda. You can't deter violent, radical Islamic jihad. You can only defeat it. You can only destroy it. So how do we destroy it? We've tried. We've spent over a decade trying to destroy it. And here's what we've tried. We've tried 2 wars in the Middle East. Now, we can all find fault of who made what mistake and pass around the blame, but the reality is after 2 wars in the Middle East, we have not destroyed Islamic jihad. President Obama came in and his plan was really to ignore it. That hasn't worked either. President Obama's plan was, well, have you ever heard him talk about, you know, the international and global community? His theory of leading from behind is that America takes a step back and somehow this global community is going to emerge and everything will be just fine. That didn't work out very well either. So then he has a new doctrine, announced just a couple of weeks ago. It's called the doctrine of strategic patience. That doctrine says the great arc of history will eventually take care of all of our problems. Now to me, I look at that and say, the president of hope and change, he's changed America's national security policy, and he's rested it on the hope that it's all going to work out well in the end. That's like saying America's security is going to be based on a new policy, and that's fingers crossed. That isn't going to work either. But President Obama, I used to think that, well, they just don't quite understand it, and when they're in office a little longer, they'll figure it out, and they'll get it, and they'll come up with a good plan. They're not going to do that. I think the president is either unable to see the problem, or he's unwilling to do anything about it, or he's in over his head. And they don't have a clue how to stop radical Islamic jihad, which in fact is in more places and in greater strength than ever before. It's in the Middle East, it's in North Africa, it's even in certain neighborhoods in the civilized world. So don't expect President Obama to take on this fight. He's checked out on this. It's going to happen in 2016, hopefully with new leadership. What would a plan look like? I don't think a plan looks like another war in the Middle East, but I sure don't think like it should look like let's just give up and hope that the great arc of history will take care of it all. I think a plan to defeat Islamic jihad has to be the kind of plan that my old boss Ronald Reagan had to win the Cold War without firing a shot. It has to have an economic component, and that economic component is to bankrupt radical jihad. How do you do that? Frack. Push the price of oil down, bankrupt the Middle East, because that's where their money is coming from. Bomb Bomb ISIS's oil fields, destroy their refineries. If there's a tanker on the 7 seas taking ISIS oil to market, sink it. Once they don't have the economic wherewithal to carry on that war, they're diminished. There has to be, though, a second component, and that's an ideological component. We have seen in the last couple of weeks where some of the Muslim leaders have stepped forward to say, we have to reform from within. President Sisi of Egypt, he's done a very courageous thing. On New Year's Day, he went to the equivalent of their Vatican, and he said to the religious leaders, sitting like you're sitting now, and he said, you have to reform. You have to reform from in. Radical jihad is your problem because you never called it out. You've got to change. Fell on deaf ears until this week, when the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar Mosque went to Saudi Arabia, and he gave the same speech. He said, we have to reform from within. We have to take responsibility for those who are perverting our sense of our great religion. Now, you would think that we, America, would have said, wow, we've been waiting for moderate Muslims to come forward for 6 years, for 10 years. We didn't do that. We didn't say a peep. In fact, our president welcomed in there the Muslim Brotherhood into the White House, and he had the Emir of Qatar, guy who supported ISIS and gave it its seed money. He was sitting in the Oval Office. I think our policy needs to have, in addition, an alliance component. We have to go to those countries in the Middle East and say, time to step up, guys. If you're not willing to put your boots on the ground, if you're not willing to put your people into the fight, don't come running to us when it doesn't work out. We need you to step up to the fight. And that may mean we twist their arms. It may mean we give them a lot of friendly encouragement, but we have to get them into the fight. The other thing is, we got to start standing tall and proud of who we are. No more of this moral equivalence. You know, radical Islamic jihad is not morally equivalent to Western civilization. So forget the apology tour. Stop talking about ISIS as if it's the same thing as the Crusades. It's not. But in the end, we also have to have a military component. I said a few minutes ago, we've tried that. We did. We had 150,000 troops in the Middle East, and it wasn't enough to stabilize, and it wasn't enough to ultimately defeat this enemy. So we need a military component, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's American boots on the ground. Now, maybe it's American special forces on the ground, but the primary military responsibility is going to have to be the Muslims in the Middle East who put their boots on the ground. And we have seen this starting to happen. Just in the last, again, several weeks, King Abdullah of Jordan, he put on the jumpsuit and he sent the planes. ISIS picked the wrong king to pick a fight with. The other person who stepped up is the president of Egypt, who again, he went to bomb ISIS in Libya when he saw his own Coptic Christians, not Muslims, Coptic Christians who were beheaded. So the Middle East is starting to wake up. We have to encourage that. Again, whatever they need to do, we have to help them do it. But at the end of the day, it's got to be their boots on the ground. And if we had a president who was able to stand up and lead, and you said to the Bahrainis, to the Saudis, to the Jordanians, to the Egyptians, and maybe even to the Turks, you put your boots on the ground, that's over 1 million boots on the ground. Now, that many boots on the ground with American assistance, and as I said, maybe with a little help from some friendly American special forces, you are now having a military solution to this. So I look at the problem in the Middle East and I say, for the rest of my life, we are going to be dealing with radical Islamic jihad. It's not going to be this president who takes up this cudgel and wins the battle. It's going to be the next one. And that's why it's so important that you're all here. I worked for President Reagan. I was a young foot soldier in the Reagan Revolution. And I look at today and I say, we're in a 1980 moment again. In 1980, the President of the United States, then Jimmy Carter, he talked about a national malaise, that we had sort of lost our sense of purpose. The economy was in the tank, double-digit inflation, very high unemployment. We also had American diplomats held hostage in Iran for hundreds of days with no prospect of getting them released, and we had let our defenses crumble. Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, and I've got to tell you, when we came into the Pentagon, we were stunned by what we saw. We had ships that couldn't sail because there was no fuel. We had planes that couldn't fly because we didn't have enough pilots who had enough training hours to be certified to fly. And we had tanks. For every one tank that worked, we had one sitting right next to it that we cannibalized for spare parts. But more importantly, we found that we had junior enlisted military personnel who qualified for food stamps. And the whole American attitude towards who we are and who our military was had sunk to such levels that we were ashamed of ourselves. 8 years later, Ronald Reagan gave his farewell address from the Oval Office. And you know what had happened by then? The economy had turned around. We had created 19 million new jobs. We had set in place the military policy that ultimately led us to win the Cold War without firing a shot. And what Reagan said that he was most proud of that he had done as president was he restored Americans' faith in ourselves and the world's faith in our country. We're at that 1980 moment again. The economy is lousy. President who doesn't think we're anything particularly exceptional about us, and a military that can't seem to win a war, isn't given the tools to win the war. So I would say to every one of you out here who's young and eager, you want to change the world, get out and do it. We did it once before in 1980, and you can do it again today. Because 30 years from now, I will be looking down from heaven, or up from wherever, and I will be looking at you, and I will be saying to you, you have a chance now to go out and change everything. My generation did it. Yours can do it again. And if you don't, I'm going to haunt you to the end of the earth, because you will have taken the greatest gift that the world has ever seen, a strong democracy, a vibrant economy, and a national defense that has not used our power to exploit or to conquer, but only to lead. So every one of you get out and do your thing, because you don't want to be haunted by me. I got 5 kids, and they'll tell you, you don't want to be haunted by me in 30 years. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's great. That was wonderful, KT.
Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Wonderful speeches, panelists. Let's get right to it. Is America strong?
You talking to me?
Open it up to the panel. Are we strong now?
Since you're tired, I'll jump in.
Yeah, we'll let Sarah do it. We want to get a national revival.
It's a good week to ask someone from Heritage that question, because we've produced the first ever index of military strength. And maybe there's been something like it in the past, but nothing now that I know from being in Congress that we can actually look at the threats around the world and measure our capabilities against it. And what this report shows that on most measures, America is marginal as far as our ability to defend ourselves in the way that we had laid it out. That doesn't mean we don't have great people in the military, still have superiority in a lot of ways, but if you go through this report, you just realize we have let this administration decimate our military in a lot of ways, and our morale is probably back to or worse than it was, despite the great people who are giving their lives to serve us. But there's a lot we can do to improve there. Mm-hmm. KT?
Okay. Do you know that the majority of the American people think that we're an empire in decline? I mean, the statistics are just phenomenal. It's like 65% of the people in America think that their children are not going to have as good a life as they have, and it's all over, and we've got a president, who doesn't think anything's particularly exceptional. And if you pick up the newspaper, you see any one of our leading mainstream media people talking about, oh, if only America could be like China. If only, we had our mojo back again, but we don't, because after all, we're not terribly exceptional. I'm going to pull something out of my pocket. See what this is? This is an iPhone. Actually, it's an old iPhone. And this iPhone didn't exist 8 years ago. This iPhone has changed the world, and we invented it. We are on the cusp of having a dozen iPhone-like technologies. We're going to have, let me tell you what it's going to be like in 8 years from now, okay? We're going to base this economic renaissance and revolution on the cheap energy that, despite the president's vetoing the Keystone Pipeline, despite the fact that he really is standing in the way of energy independence, we're going to do it. And when we do it, that cheap energy is going to marry up with a number of new inventions. It's going to be things like 3D printing, nanotechnology, robotics. It's going to be wearable medical devices. I've got an old digital watch. I'm going to buy a new Apple Watch the minute it comes out. You want to know why? Because it's going to register my cholesterol. Actually, it's probably not so good. It's probably going to give my pulse. It's going to be a wearable medical device. Everybody in the world is going to want that. I'm going to probably, 8 years from now, have a self-driving car. Honey, you're going to be so happy when I don't have to drive that car. We are developing these things. We're going to make them here in America, too. And guess what? We're going to sell them to the whole world. So when people say, oh, our best days are over, we can't seem to do anything right, I used to be our glass half empty person. I mean, my graduate work was at MIT. I'm a nuclear weapons analyst. I was always looking to think, oh my God, this is going to go wrong. This is so terrible. I am now a totally half full person because I look around and I say, American ingenuity, American inventiveness, the free market system. Even Barack Obama's not going to be able to stand in the way of the economic renaissance that is just around the corner. So America's strong. You guys haven't seen anything yet. We're on the verge of the second great American century.
Well, let's talk about this, because this is one of Dr. Brooks's bread and butter topics. You've talked about an economic recovery. Are we on the verge of an economic recovery? Are we on the verge of an economic renaissance? And let's pause and discuss this current recovery, and I'm doing the bunny ears, because we have a record number of people either underemployed or have opted out of the workforce. And if you look at it, it's funny how the left always talks about the gap between the rich and the poor, when it seems like it's increased since we've had Barack Obama as president. So are we on the verge of that economic renaissance? And if so, what can be done to facilitate it moving forward?
So if all of us in this room put our heads together as diabolical right-wingers that we are, and
if only there was a convention to do that.
Yeah, and if we decided we were going to come up with an economic system that made the rich as possible and the poor stagnating at the very bottom, we'd invent an economic system called Obamonomics. It's like a practical joke on poor people. I mean, you can't believe when you look at the data. Sure, we're going to grow at 3%. You know what that means? That means 7% growth for the top 10% of the income distribution and 0 for the bottom half. That's a huge scandal. The people who can't be here, frankly, the people who are not voting like a lot of you, are suffering and nobody's working for them. That's what's really going on. Are we in an economic recovery? Sure, if you're in the top quarter, 10%, 5%. Oh, you want the data? The stock market has increased by 140% in inflation-adjusted terms since the day Obama took over as president, right? 81% of those gains have gone to the top 10% of the income distribution. I don't begrudge them their gains. That's great. I want people to be able to retire. But at the same time, we've seen none of it for people in the bottom. Unemployment has stayed high, has stayed at shockingly high rates. Do you want to know the scandals that are going on in this country? Think of the most wrenching social scandal that we've seen over the past year. That was Ferguson, Missouri. It doesn't matter what side you are on politics. It was terrible for this country that this happened. You know the story of Ferguson, Missouri? 37% African-American youth unemployment. That's the story of Ferguson, Missouri. Are we in an economic recovery? Yeah, if you're lucky. If you're on the side that the Obama administration is really helping, but not if you're on the other side. Is America strong? Absolutely, but it's not sharing that strength with everybody. That's why we need to think more creatively. That's why we need politicians who, no matter how people vote, are actually going to be in the fight for every single American, including the entire bottom half. And that starts with education reform, where education systems are not working for grown-ups, they're working for kids, which I know is a crazy idea, right? I mean, Number two, where you have politicians who are radicals for work, who will do anything. They're nuts. Education is important, but when we talk about setting the economy free through tax reform and energy reform, it's so that people can work and not just people with college degrees. So we have good paying jobs for everybody. And number three is pushing entrepreneurship all the way down to the bottom. I know most of you are not from Washington, D.C. Let me give you one statistic that I hope is going to make you even more of an activist. Here in Washington, let's say you're an ordinary entrepreneur. That is to say, let's say you're a mom and your kids have grown up and you want to become a realtor. okay? You got to go to school to do that, to get your license. How long do you have to be in school? 135 hours. Lot, little, I don't know. Now let's say that you're poor, single mom with kids at home, and you want to braid hair and do nails in your living room for money. You know how much schooling you need? 1,500 hours. You need to go to school full-time for a year, or the government of the District of Columbia will shut you down and fine you. Do we have an economic recovery? Not when we're doing that to poor people, we don't. Not an economic recovery that's just and fair to all with favoritism toward none.
All right.
That's exactly Senator DeMint's talking point, ensuring opportunity for all and favoritism toward none. Senator DeMint, what are some policy issues that we can pursue that would help create American opportunity and then strength?
Well, we've all mentioned a couple of them, and the big one really is education opportunity. And it brings America together. I mean, 10 years ago, the left was saying that more education choice would hurt the poor, when in fact the statistics show it's completely the opposite. Wherever states have expanded choices of all kinds, you see it helping the poor the most, the minorities the most. And if kids can get a good education, and Arthur said it right, the federal education system is a jobs program for union bosses and union members, and it hasn't worked for the states. We don't need to pass another No Child Left Behind or something like Common Core. But we see amazing things happening at the state level, and KT's right. If you look at the things that are working at the state, your glass can be half full, because there's some great things happening around the country, but Washington doesn't want it to happen. Because when you decentralize, the teachers' unions don't like it. The big companies that do all the testing, they want one format for the whole country, and it goes back to cronyism. We can change that if Americans get engaged. And part of what we want to do at Heritage, I know AEI is the same way, is not only talk about the programs like education choice and energy independence. I mean, two big uniting ideas that build a stronger society, a stronger economy. But the left can't go there. At the same time, we need to point out every time, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, they support some crony program that brings more power to Washington. I mean, we just need to scream bloody murder and point it out, and that's what we plan to do over the next couple of years.
Good for you.
KT, I want to ask you a question about national security. While in recent years in America, we've seemed less concerned about keeping our strength and growing our strength, particularly abroad, a couple of our foes overseas have had different ideas. ISIS is strengthening, Putin is strengthening. Who can stop Islamic Jihad, and who can slow down Putin, and how do we do it?
Well, it's not just ISIS. I mean, that's the sort of headline of the day. Radical Islamic Jihad has various varieties and flavors. It's ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda, it's Al-Shabaab, it's the Al-Nusra Front. That's radical Sunni jihad. There's also radical Shiite jihad. There's Hezbollah terrorists. So it's a whole sort of mindset, and their mindset says we want to destroy Western civilization. Now, what can we do to stop that? I mean, what can we do? As I've just said, we've tried the military thing alone. That didn't work. President Obama's tried the head in the sand thing. That didn't work. And so I think the United States, and only the United States, can lead a coalition. Only the United States can lead the ideological revolution. Only the United States can lead the economic revolution. I mean, just yesterday, again, the Egyptians have come forth and said, please, America, lead. When you go around the world, I travel around to, hot spots, right? And so all I hear is, where is America? When I met with President Sisi a year ago, he said, we're not looking for anything from you. It wouldn't have cost you a nickel. It wouldn't have cost you a penny, is what he said, if you only would come out and endorse what we're trying to do. And you won't do it, and it would have made all the difference to us. It's American leadership which has stepped back. Some of that is just moral leadership and stand strong. President Obama is very fond of saying, well, if you don't like leading from behind, if you don't like strategic patience, then you must want to have another war in the Middle East. You must want to send 100,000 troops in the Middle East. Those are not the two alternatives. There's a whole lot of space in the middle. I mean, I look at conservatives today. I mean, we're not really a Republican Party, right? We're just a bunch of tribes. And the tribes, everybody sort of got their own part of the tribe. And the tribes are everything in my part of the world, the foreign policy world. It's everything from the people, the neo-isolationists, the people who want to withdraw from the world, to on the other extreme, the neoconservatives. They want to get involved in a lot of other parts of the world and really to promote democracy, sometimes with American military might. I think the United States can lead, but it should lead from the middle, the way Reagan led from the middle. We won the Cold War, not because we bested them on the battlefield, because we didn't have to fire a shot. We won that one economically, morally, politically. It was Reagan who went to the Eastern Europeans. And nobody actually remembers this, but on the day Reagan was shot, he was speaking before the AFL-CIO, and he had the labor union, and he had a speech, and in the speech, it was at the same time that the Polish dock workers were striking. And so Reagan had written into the speech, I'm speaking here to the American labor union, but I want to tell you, or their brothers in Poland, you have the right to be self-determinate. Well, nobody remembers that speech because Reagan was shot about half an hour later and survived the assassination attempt, but the nation was focused on that. The Poles, the Polish dock workers, they listened, they heard. That didn't cost us a nickel. It cost us a few words, and it sparked their revolution. The United States is the only country in the world capable of doing that, and the world is hungry for us to do it. They don't want America to invade. They don't want America to have colonies, but they want America to stand tall and be who we have always been in our history, and they will follow. But we must lead.
Very nice. And this connects to what Senator DeMint was talking about with the morality of a strong society. You're talking about how morality is essential to a strong defense. So, Dr. Brooks, is the size and scope of government, is capitalism a moral issue? When I hear the way economics is discussed in America today, it's discussed in terms of revenue generation. How do we maximize revenue? How do we get as many people on the government healthcare dole as possible? Not, is this a moral or a constitutional imperative for us to act in this way? You've written about this extensively. How is the size and scope of government when it comes to morality?
Well, we have on the right, we have this tendency to talk about money when we talk about capitalism. And for that matter, we talk about military affairs as if these weren't moral issues as well. Why do we pass up the moral issues? The answer is we've won on economics for a really long time. I mean, if you look at what happened in the 1980s, by talking in exclusively economic terms, we changed the country, and it was better for people. But you know what? It's time to actually go back to the morals that matter most to people. Why do you want a free society? Why do you want the freedoms that we enjoy in the United States? Why are we willing to share these with other people? It's because it's our moral duty to make people free. Thomas Jefferson talked about empire for America, by the way, notwithstanding the Archbishop of Canterbury. Thomas Jefferson talked about America as an empire of liberty. What does that mean? That means that we don't want your stuff. We're not going to take over your country. We're not going to occupy you so we can pump out all your oil and get richer. We want to share the liberty that we have. That's a profound moral imperative. It's what sets us apart. The same thing is true when we talk about the free enterprise system. Sure, it's going to make you rich. That's great. The point is it's going to make you free. You're going to be able to express yourself. You're going to have a labor market that says, I'm going to match your skills with your passions. Look, I lived for a long time in Spain. My wife grew up poor in Spain. Nobody ever quits a job, even if they hate it in Spain. Why? Because you'll be unemployed for the rest of your career. If you're a postman, you don't like being a postman, tough, suck it up. You're going to be a postman until you retire. In America, I bet most of you have changed careers at least once. That's what freedom brings. It brings the ability not to just build a business, it builds the ability to build your life. And that's really a moral thing. Remember that, and don't lose an argument anymore by talking about money. When people say, oh yeah, tell me about your precious capitalist system, talk about the morality of freedom and what it means to you in your heart and what you want to share with others. And if you do that, you can prepare to win.
Yeah, thanks. That's good.
We're closing in on the end of the panel, and one of the things that I really admire the CPAC's done this year is they've made this convention about activism, not just about the ideas. I grew up, I have activist roots. I know Senator DeMint, Dr. Brooks, you're career activists. With the moments we have left, let's talk about what people can do, both watching on TV and people in the audience today, what they can do to get involved. And let's go from stage right, stage left.
From my side is what you're trying to say. Well, it's something foremost on my mind. I found out in the Senate, you can elect some good folks, but unless you build more support around the country, they're going to get their legs cut out from under them once they get to D.C. I came to Heritage not only because of the research and policy capabilities, but the platform that we have to communicate to people all over the country, and because of our sister organization, Heritage Action, that actually is organizing across the country, putting people from, whether it be local Tea Party or local Republican, together, giving them ways to get informed and teaching them how to constructively engage in the political process, keeping Congress more accountable. But I just recommend to anyone who wants to get more involved across the country is to go to heritageaction.com. They are built on the intellectual integrity of the Heritage Foundation. And to me, it's the 1-2 punch that we have to have. Actually, we talk about a 1-2-3 punch, Alex. The policy backed up by the research, the communication to talk to people and connect with them where they are, and the advocacy and organization. And we need all of that, and I'm convinced that the majority of Americans share our ideas if we just give them a way to get involved. And that's what I hear from them. I hear 3 things across the country. Jim, thanks for fighting. We're praying for you. What can I do? What can I do is what we hear all around CPAC. That's why people are here, and I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks.
I endorse everything that Jim said. I've been so enriched personally by the work of the Heritage Foundation. As a matter of fact, I'm a donor to the Heritage Foundation. And I have to say, and I'm so proud that Jim is a donor to the American
Exactly, yes. They're partners.
That's exactly right. Here's the key thing in a society that's built on families, in a society that's built on institutions. Do you want to be an activist? Be an activist at home. You're going to change the hearts of the people who love you. This is it. And then get out of the house and go around people who will respect you, people who want to be with you, and be a leader. And to be a leader, you have to be pure of spirit, in a spirit of answering anger with love and being completely informed. You have a responsibility to not lose arguments. And the way you don't lose arguments is by practicing the best rhetorical techniques and being completely up on the facts. Our organizations exist so you don't lose arguments, quite frankly. You go to heritage.org or AEI.org, I guarantee you people are going to say, "Where'd you get so smart?" And that's the way that in your next Thanksgiving dinner, when your sister-in-law says, "I'm not so sure that the free enterprise system is helping poor people," or "I don't think that the American military should be any place around the world," you're going to say, "Oh, wait, I've got the facts." If you can, in a spirit of love, win arguments at the micro level with your sister-in-law, that's the best activism in which you could ever engage.
Amen.
That's good.
Well done. Okay, I've got a really easy answer, okay? Look to your right. Look at the person on your right. Now look to the person on your left. Chances are one of those 2 people isn't going to vote. And chances are in a primary, maybe of the 3 of you, only one of you is going to show up. So you want to have a revolution? Look to your right, look to your left. And come election day, make sure that they go to the polls. And if you really want to find out about the issues, obviously you go to the Heritage Foundation, obviously you go to the American Enterprise Institute, but most obviously, you want to go to that cable news network that's fair and balanced. Thank you.
Fantastic. I love all those points. Scott Rasmussen always talks about how it's not necessarily the pundits that change people's hearts and minds, it's your friends and family. So we're giving you the arguments to take home and then engage the people who you know and already trust you, and that's how the votes change. Do we have a chance to fire up those slides? Because I know we're closing in on the end here. The slides? Okay, so we're presenting 3 slides. The first one is going to be the important points to remember. These are things that we learned today that hopefully you can take home. One of the things we're going to get to in the next slide is about activism, and that's if you have a cell phone, you are a journalist. You're a citizen journalist, as Andrew Breitbart had dubbed you. Take a picture with that cell phone that you have. Okay, so the points to remember: Three-legged stool: democracy, free markets, and strong defense. Ensure opportunity for all and favoritism towards none. Free enterprise is the anti-poverty miracle. And Islamic jihad is the existential threat of our time, and it can only be defeated with overwhelming force. And it's conservative ideas that won the election in November, not K Street or Wall Street. And this is where you can find everyone: KT McFarland at ktmcfarland.com, Dr. Brooks at aei.org, and Senator DeMint at heritage.org. Of course, check out KT on Fox and read Dr. Brooks in the New York Times. And then you could check out everything that's on my mind at Breitbart.com, and check us all out on Twitter as well. And then the last, our activism items, action items. Do we have that slide? Great. This is a cool one from Dr. Brooks. Practice making the case for free enterprise and a strong defense and American exceptionalism in 30 seconds. That's that Thanksgiving dinner conversation and being prepared for that. Engaging in the social web. This is the modern day digital dinner table, the modern day digital lunchroom. It is on Facebook, it's on other social media. Share content that has your values. And as I said, if you have a cell phone, it's not just for selfies, it's not just for texting while you drive, you should not be doing that. You're a citizen journalist. You're an expert in your own community. Make media contacts. We're here to touch base with you, and we can see what's going on in your communities. And then that makes you an activist as well. And as KT said, vote, vote, vote. And that's everyone's Twitter handles beneath that. Check us out to follow us in whatever we're doing. Thank you, everyone, very much for being a part of the Strong America panel.
Thank you.
Take these ideas and let's make America a little stronger than we are today.
Good to see you, Arthur. It was good to be on stage with you.